There's a lot to cover and a lot that overlaps. And I want to go through this with you in a way that kind of puts things together. Our friends at Breitbart, Wendell Hussabo, he shows that the New York Times reportedly edited a headline twice on Tuesday about a blast that blew up a Gaza hospital, changing the title each time to reflect less blame against Israel for the tragic explosion. Now, folks, if you follow me online, I don't read any comments because what's happening is these front groups are flooding in. They give their comments. I don't worry about comments. But you should read what I post. Because I said yesterday that I had information, and it was accurate, that not only did Israel not shoot a missile that hit that hospital, but the hospital wasn't hit. It was a parking lot next to the hospital. And that 500 casualties never happened. There were dozens, but not 500. So in every respect, the Hamas propaganda was reported by our media, regurgitated by our media, with very few exceptions. So now we know what I knew yesterday, that it was the Islamo-Nazi terrorists who accidentally misfired a missile, which happens often. It didn't hit the hospital, it hit the parking lot, or some say behind it. And there were not 500 casualties. Now, the problem is the American media, the European media, and, of course, the Middle East media went with the Hamas line. Hezbollah grabs it, Iran grabs it, all the terrorist groups and all the inbreds that run these countries, they use it. And so our media, the American media, in significant part is responsible for what you're seeing all around the world today. Because these terrorist networks, including in the United States of America, they seize on these opportunities. I told you about Hamas's network in the United States, on our college campuses through Students for Justice in Palestine, and CARE, and the rest of them. So they use social media, they use the internet to draw everybody to these rallies, and then their groups organize, and they pounce. And that's what you're seeing. In addition to the indoctrination and brainwashing that's been taking place in our colleges and universities for decades. So the New York Times edited a headline twice on Tuesday about this explosion. After the blast, multiple pieces of evidence emerged from the Israeli Defense Forces, and not only them, but from independent television networks that have cameras set. Even Al Jazeera, and then they pulled it back as fast as they could. Al Jazeera is owned by Qatar, the ones that fund Hamas and, among others, and protect the Hamas leadership. But even they showed it. And then, of course, the Israelis released the audio of the conversation between two Nazis. Now, a friend of mine said, well, why didn't they release that earlier? Why didn't they release that earlier? Does anybody know? It's obvious why they didn't release it earlier. They had to make a decision. If we release it, then the Nazis will know that we have a way of weapons to produce it, intercepting their communications. People are so ignorant. But if we release it, we'll also have this is just further piling on evidence of who did what. Now, it doesn't matter to the Arab world and to the peace-loving Palestinians. Doesn't matter to them. Not in the least. Doesn't matter to our friends in the Middle East. Not in the least. Egypt, Jordan, and the rest. Saudi Arabia. So it's released to persuade the American media and the European media that we didn't do it. We really didn't do it. Even though Hamas says we did, we really didn't do it because Israel is facing an anti-Semitic American media and anti-American American media. How many times have I said it's one and the same, really? And it is. So they had to put all this information out to persuade not the Arab street, they can't be persuaded of anything, but the media street. The BBC, the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, AP, Reuters, all of them pushing a lie. Pushing a lie. So, the first headline was, Israeli strike kills hundreds of hospital Palestinians say. It was Hamas that said it. Now, I have to ask the media, are Hamas and the Palestinians the same thing? Or the Palestinians don't support Hamas? Or what is it with you people? It's like the use of woman. Oh, she's the first black woman who can't even define what a woman is on the Supreme Court. Well, which is it? It's neither. It's whatever works. The second headline dropped the Israeli accusation, but still called the blast a strike. The third headline dropped the word strike, a word that could insinuate an Israeli airstrike, and said at least 500 dead in blast at Gaza hospital, Palestinians say. So according to the New York Times, let's just be abundantly clear. The Palestinians, Hamas are the same thing. Because it wasn't Palestinians per se who said it, some guy on the street in Gaza City. It was their health service, which is run by Hamas. They said it. So just to be clear, the New York Times has reached the conclusion, perhaps unwittingly, that the Palestinians, Hamas are the same thing. But they'll never admit it. It's not the first time the Times changed its story about the recent conflict on the Gaza Strip's border, they write. The paper published a story last week referring to Hamas as Hamas terrorists before revising it to Hamas gunmen. The New York Times revised the story a second time on Wednesday to harass Hamas terrorists after there was backlash. They have no moral core. They never have and they never will. I mean, after all, this is the New York Times that covered up the Holocaust and betrayed the Holocaust, the millions of people who died in the Holocaust. Then we have another example here in Washington, D.C., the Cannon House building. Protesters take over Capitol Hill. Spencer Brown at Town Hall. Well, who are these people? The day after authorities on Capitol Hill warned lawmakers and their aides about a potential for demonstration activity on the U.S. Capitol grounds, a, quote, civil disturbance on Wednesday, unquote, while promising a, quote, heightened security posture and increased police presence, a group of apparent Hamas sympathizers took over the rotunda of the Cannon House office building to demand a ceasefire now. According to the U.S. Capitol Police, demonstrations of any size are prohibited inside the congressional building. Well, aren't they obstructing work, then, that's taking place in the Capitol? I understand they're going to be charged with trespassing, but isn't it more than that? What do you say, Judge Jackson? Judge Chunknick, or whatever the hell your name is? But who is this group? You know, it's interesting. I looked up the group. I'm well familiar with this group, but I looked it up just to get the link and the best explanation of what this group is, and I spread it among some of my media friends, and I haven't used it. They're sitting on it. It's a Jewish group. Yes, it is a Jewish group. But what is it? Jewish Voice for Peace. Okay, I saw that in one of the chyrons. Jewish Voice for Peace. Well, what's that? Well, it's just a little Google search away. This is from NGO Monitor, ngo-monitor.org, which tracks these groups. And they write in an executive summary, Jewish Voice for Peace is a U.S.-based political organization which refers to itself as the, quote, Jewish wing of the Palestinian Solidarity Movement, unquote. JVP provides the facade of significant Jewish support for BDS and other forms of demonization including on university campuses and in churches, while also seeking to create, quote, a wedge within the American Jewish community and generate polarization over Israel. JVP is not transparent about funding sources. And in light of this lack of transparency on the part of JVP, NGO Monitor undertook a search in its funders and supporters. In total, between the years of 2014 and 2015, that's as far as they go back, $626,793 they were able to find in donations and grants awarded to it. And the research reveals that this JVP received funding from a broad range of foundations and charitable trusts, many of which, unsurprisingly, also contribute to other anti-Israel organizations. See, this helps to know this, doesn't it? That's who at the Why do I have to do this? Well, I live for it. But why don't the others do it? On TV. Among the donors, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Tides Foundation, Fire Doll Foundation, Schwab Charitable Foundation, Jewish Communal Fund, and so forth. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, this is a truly sleazy operation. Truly sleazy operation that uses the Jewish faith and the name Jewish basically to represent, I guess we'd call them the Palestinian Hamas, right? Well, the New York Times is so confused, now I'm confused. It refers to itself as the Jewish wing of the Palestinian Solidarity Movement. That means it's the Jewish wing, in my opinion, of a terrorist movement. Self-haters. I've talked about them for a long time on this radio show. I've come under vicious attack. But I call them as I see them, and I see them with very clear eyes. So the Jewish group, unquote, three of whom attacked police. But it's mostly peaceful, don't you know? It's never an insurrection if it's the left. Even when they're blowing up the Capitol, blowing up the Pentagon, trying to blow up the White House, like the Weather Underground. It's mostly peaceful. Or Black Lives Matter, mostly peaceful. And so the Jewish Voice for Peace, or JVP, there it was, all organized in the Cannon office building, disrupting Congress. And they won't be charged with obstruction, just trespassing. We have people sitting in prison in Washington, D.C. as I speak, who were peaceful, and they were in the Capitol building on January 6th. They didn't hurt a fly. They've had the book thrown at them. The book thrown at them. Jewish Voice for Peace. No better than Students for Justice in Palestine. They're all front groups. They're all heavily funded by overseas operations, by a Hamas network, by a Islamic Jihad network, by a Muslim Brotherhood network, right under our noses. And the Federal Bureau of Investigation is focused on what? MAGA. Christopher Wray says what? White supremacists. They're the greatest threat we face. He's an idiot. Obviously, there's Klansmen and neo-Nazis. It's not the greatest threat we face. This is the greatest threat we face. And by the way, if you want to see what CAIR is up to, CAIR, go to their website. They are full bore ahead. Radical, Hamas-supporting propaganda.